When I first heard that our assignment was going to be to make a medieval meal, I thought, well, I can't do that. I mean, I live a half a mile from the Byerly's in St. Louis Park. My idea of cooking is going to Byerly's and buying something. But when I read the readings from Medieval Taste, Food, Cooking, and the Table, I thought, oh, there's something to learn here. I'm going to figure out a way to make a meal. I know, I'll go down to the Minneapolis Farmers Market. However, a farmer's market in Minnesota in April, notice how everybody's bundled up and there's not much stuff there. I think I'm going to have to go back to Byerly's. So it doesn't take much imagination when you walk through Byerly's to think, this could be kind of like a medieval market. Each little place there could be a little booth. If you ignore the ice, doesn't this guy look a little medieval? And look at those giant rounds of cheese. Can't you just see that on a street vendor? Ignore the case. And look at all those vegetables. I mean, it's just like a street market. The sign over this bread actually says European breads. I mean, if you ignore the glass, it's just like a street market. So after I figured out where I could get my food, I thought, okay, what kind of meal should I make? And reading through our sources, and particularly the medieval taste book, I came to the conclusion there were three types of meals I could make: peasant, aristocratic, or an urban meal. And the peasant and the aristocratic, everything I read about that, there were feasts. I mean, an important point of putting myself in the position of eating in the Middle Ages, especially the peasant and the aristocratic, these were social events. You had to have lots of people, and the everyday eating was a way that people got to know each other and communicate with each other and enjoy each other. That's so much different than today. That was something I really took away from this lesson. And so I thought, well, the urban dweller, well, that's kind of me. I mean, the idea of being maybe a scribe back in the Middle Ages, and I'll go down to the inn, and so I think I'll pick on the urban meal. But as an aside, the chapter about the battle of the oil, butter, and lard, I found that fascinating, that oil was something the aristocrats used, butter was for the peasants, and the lards were barbarians used the lard. The fact that just something as basic and simple as the oil, butter, and lard had such great social significance. So like I said, let's try urban. I mean, in the medieval taste book, there was this recipe about, it was tavern food. I thought, all right, I can be a medieval scribe, and I'll go down to the tavern and have a meal, and I'll order jellied fish without oil. Really? Well, it's not too bad. So I went to Byerly's, found all these ingredients. But then as I went to make it, I read this recipe, and I thought to myself, cook well rinsed fish. How long? Now I understand back then they had experience. They would cook it until it looked done. I remember my wife talking about her grandmother. Well, just put it until it looks right. That's kind of like this. How do you know when fish is done? So, well, I cheated. I Googled it to see how. I didn't want to kill myself making this, so I went a little 20th century and found out how long you're supposed to boil codfish so that I didn't get food poisoning. And then it says put in saffron. Do you know that saffron costs $13 for a little bottle? And I'm not going to buy a 13 bottle of saffron to put on a $9 piece of cod. So I bought some fish spices from Byerly's. So we'll do a little substitution here. And then I thought, well, the fish, and then, potato sounds like would go good with this. So let's throw a potato in the pot too. And then I thought, well, that's really, I probably want more than just fish and onions. So let's add wine bread and cheese. That'll go good with anything. So I added all that together, and you can see all my ingredients there. So here's the final product. I did have to cook it on the grill outside. My wife said, you're not boiling codfish in the kitchen. So I respected that. But the bread and cheese was excellent. And the codfish, potatoes, and onions, well, that was okay. I probably won't make it again, but it tasted very medieval. So one of the takeaways I had from this project was I got a whole new feeling of what it was like to eat a medieval meal. And there was a lot of the research I read talked about how you ate food with your hands so that you had a physical connection to the food. I thought that was very interesting. Then the only utensils were really spoon and a fork. If there was a knife, it was just a big carving knife for whatever meat might be on the table. But people did not have individual knives. And they didn't even, sometimes they didn't even have individual forks and spoons. There would, or individual cups. There would just be shared cups. So this really was a community effect meal. You were sharing everything. You were sharing the food. You were sharing your utensils. You were sharing your cups. It was, you ate together. I found that fascinating. The other takeaway from this project was the social aspect of medieval food. From the medieval taste book, they quoted Plutarch's table talk saying, "We do not invite one another merely to eat and drink, but to eat and drink together." Like we said in the last slide, sharing stuff was crucial. And also, how much you ate was a sign of your status. I mean, the rulers had to show that they could eat a lot so they could be strong, and they were strong because they ate a lot. And if you read history very much, you realize a lot of the aristocrats had gout. Then later in the Middle Ages, the amount of food was substituted with, here's this vast bounty of food. We have all this stuff we could eat. Don't necessarily have to eat it because we watched all those other people get sick, but there's lots of food. Social status was important too. In the book, there was a very fascinating story about Dante's, Dante's Inferno, a famous poet at the time, and King Hubert of Naples invited him to his banquet. And to make a long story short, Dante showed up dressed as a bum, a peasant, and nobody noticed he was there. And the king was upset that Dante had invited Dante and he didn't come. They said, "Yeah, he was here. He was that guy dressed like a bum at the end of the table. Well, bring him back the next day." So Dante comes the next day, all dressed in finery and everything. And then when the meal is served, he starts dumping his food and wine on his clothes. And the king says, "What are you doing?" And Dante said, "Well, I was here yesterday and you ignored me. So you must, and today I'm being treated with honor. It must not be me. It must be my clothes. And so I'm going to let my clothes enjoy the meal." I thought that was kind of funny and a message there. So as I summarize and think, what have I learned from this lesson? The thought occurs to me, have we lost something really important? I shared this recipe on Facebook and there were no takers. I mean, one guy said it didn't sound too bad, but everybody else, the general reaction was, "I can't believe you're going to eat that." And as I mentioned before, I had to make this outside so I didn't stink up the whole house. I mean, I ended up eating this by myself because my wife did not particularly want to eat boiled codfish. But how many people today, I know we do, you eat in front of a TV even when you're with other people? The key part of a medieval meal was the socialness and the sharing of food and ideas and your lives. And today, as I mentioned in our last class, we live in such a hyper individualistic world that we've lost that. And meals are a way that maybe we can get it back.